Welcome back to Live from Paris. I'm Mark Owen. These are the main world news headlines. The White House confirms that President Trump is prepared to declare a state of emergency to get the near $6 billion he wants to build his border wall with Mexico. The Democrats say a legal challenge could follow, as there's no such emergency. Last day of campaigning in the presidential election in Nigeria. Young people said to be supporters of the president, Muhammadu Buhari, tried to storm the Electoral Commission. Buhari and chief rival Abubakar signed an accord to accept the result to avoid any further trouble. Suicide bomb attacks claim at least 44 lives in Kashmir. The victims, Indian soldiers. The attack claimed by Muslim terror group. The incident is stoking the existing tensions between India and Pakistan over the ownership of Kashmir. Thank you very much for being with us. The US President Donald Trump is ready to declare a state of emergency to get his hands on nearly $6 billion to build his border wall with Mexico. The White House has confirmed this news. President Trump's prepared to sign the government funding bill and issue a national emergency on the border. That bill has already been through the US Senate as we speak. The bill's needed to avoid a partial federal shutdown on Friday. Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican, was the first to reveal Trump's plans. House Speaker and Democrat Nancy Pelosi quick to respond, threatening that legal action. Well, let's hear from both. First, McConnell.
And I would say to all my colleagues, has indicated he's prepared to sign the bill. He will also be issuing a national emergency declaration at the same time. And I've indicated to him that I'm going to support the national emergency declaration. So for all of my colleagues, the President will sign the bill. We'll be voting on it shortly.
It's important to note that when the president declares this emergency, first of all, it's not an emergency, what's happening at the border. It's a humanitarian challenge to us. We will review our options. We'll be prepared to respond appropriately to it. I know the Republicans have some unease about it, no matter what they say, because if the president can declare an emergency on something that he has created as an emergency, an illusion that he wants to convey, just think of what a president with different values can present to the American people.
Nancy Pelosi there. The latest is that the Senate has resoundingly approved the border security compromise that ignores most of President Trump's demands for building a wall with Mexico. Of course, that goes to the House next. And as McConnell was saying there, Trump will declare the state of emergency in order to get his hands on that cash. Well, let's get some further analysis. David Smith joined us earlier, the bureau chief of The Guardian in Washington.
I think Donald Trump is certainly trying to save face after, if you remember, a record 35-day government shutdown over this demand for a border wall, a tremendous political haggling. And in the last few hours, I think the right-wing commentators in America got to him. There was still a lot of talk that if he signed this bill produced by Congress, this bipartisan agreement, it would have been a humiliating defeat for him. He would have caved in on his border wall demand. And so the long-awaited, long-speculated moment, he is indeed reaching for these emergency powers. I think some critics will wonder, why did he not just do that several weeks ago and avoid the pain of the shutdown and the political costs, but it's come to that last resort now. The emergency powers are likely to be challenged in court. Nancy Pelosi was asked about that, and she said it's certainly an option. In that clip you heard, I thought it was also telling that Mitch McConnell, the Republican Senate Majority Leader, said he would support Trump's move to declare an emergency, and that is certainly one of the big questions now. Will Republicans get on board and back the president on this? It's a good sign for him that McConnell is saying he will, and it's just a case of whether Mitch McConnell can get Republican senators to go along with it. But in a sense, it's one ending, but it's also, I think, the beginning of a long, drawn-out legal battle that will at least allow Trump to say to his supporters, he's tried everything and he's fighting tooth and nail to get this wall built.
David Smith of The Guardian, who joined us a little earlier from Washington. It's a year since the Parkland shooting and that's been marked all across the U.S. state of Florida and beyond. The main commemoration of the atrocity took place at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, where 17 students were gunned down. Last year, a 19-year-old former pupil stormed the school armed with an AK-47 automatic rifle and opened fire. Among the gathered crowd this Thursday, those who lost their children that day.
I cannot bring Scott back. I love my son. I haven't heard his voice for 365 days, voice to voice. I've heard recordings, I've gotten emails, I've gotten letters from his students, from students' parents, I've gotten letters from his campers, from campers' parents. But I haven't gotten anything from him.
A year after the Parkland shootings commemorated today in Florida. Nigeria's incumbent President Muhammadu Buhari has made a final rallying speech ahead of Saturday's election. Mr. Buhari called for peace on voting day. He and his main opponent, Atiku Abubakar, have signed a peace accord and agreed to accept the election result, whatever happens, so to avoid any kind of violence related to the actual result. And it's just as well these two have put their heads together on this, because there have been fatal incidents earlier this week related to the election, and one of them claimed by the Islamic State group in Borno State. Here at France 24, Erin Ogunki has been assessing the credentials of both main candidates, Muhammadu Buhari and Atiku Abubakar.
They're the two frontrunners in Nigeria's presidential election. To the right, Atiku Abubakar, who served as vice president from 1999 to 2007, and to the left, the incumbent candidate, Muhammadu Buhari, in office since 2015. At 76 years old, the former general also led the country in the 1980s as the head of a military junta. He lost presidential elections in 2003, 2007, and 2011, before beating Goodluck Jonathan in 2015. If re-elected, Buhari has vowed to tackle corruption and put an end to Boko Haram, though the militant group has been steadily gaining ground.
We are committed to deepening the work we started this first term, such that nations' assets and resources continue to be organized and utilized to do good for the common man.
Like his opponent, 72-year-old Atiku Abubakar hails from the primarily Muslim north. A top civil servant, he is also a philanthropist, a successful businessman, and one of the richest men in Nigeria. A candidate for the People's Democratic Party, his campaign is centered on revamping the economy.
I felt there was need, for somebody like me to step out, experience in politics, experience in governance, experience in business, to try and restore and bring back the country on track.
Thanks to his business interests in several sectors, including agriculture, real estate, and banking, Abubakar enjoys support from much of Nigeria's business elite. But his candidacy has been dogged by past accusations of corruption. At the end of his mandate as vice president, he was accused of having transferred $40 million of suspect funds to his wife's bank account in the United States. Allegations, he says, are politically motivated. In their final speeches ahead of the vote, both candidates appealed for calm. And on Wednesday, they signed a peace agreement, encouraging their supporters to refrain from violence and to respect the results of the vote.
Full coverage, of course, of the election in Nigeria all weekend here on France 24. Next, a terror attack in Kashmir is pushing tensions between India and Pakistan to near breaking point. 44 Indian soldiers were killed when a car packed with explosives was driven into their bus. A group calling themselves Jaish-e-Mohammed says they are behind the atrocity. Kashmir is a territory disputed by India and Pakistan. There have been incidents before, but this one, according to observers, is the worst in decades. Our correspondent Shreya Banerjee is in New Delhi.
It was a suicide bomber that rammed an explosive-laden vehicle into a convoy of the Central Reserve Police Force, India's largest paramilitary force, on the state's, Jammu and Kashmir state's main highway. It was heavily guarded, so it's been seen as a big security breach. There were about 2,500 personnel who were being moved from the southern city of Jammu to Srinagar. There were 78 vehicles in the convoy. And the attack, like you said, is being claimed by the Pakistan-based Islamist group Jaish-e-Mohammed. Journalists on the scene say there were body parts and blood scattered around about a 100-meter stretch of the highway. It's the first suicide bombing in decades in the state, and also the worst security attack to take place during Prime Minister Narendra Modi's tenure. The previous high-profile attack took place in 2016 when militants stormed an army base in the town of Uri and killed about 19 soldiers. The last major car bombing in the state took place in 2001, and it was also claimed by Jaish-e-Mohammed. 40 people, including 3 suicide bombers, died in that attack. So this is the worst suicide bombing in a decade in the state of Kashmir.
Shreya Banerjee there with the thoughts from New Delhi, where she is based. Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the opposition in the UK, says Prime Minister Theresa May has no support for her Brexit deal. This comes after the UK Parliament once again turned on Mrs May's plan. She lost the latest vote by 303 to 258. Lawmakers voting then against her plan, notably members of her own side, abstained, led by Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Tory MP who runs his own hedge fund business. They're unhappy that Mrs May endorsed Parliament's decision to rule out a no-deal Brexit. That, of course, the Speaker, John Bercow. Mr Corbyn, there he is, Labour leader, accused Mrs May of continually ignoring Parliament and trying to run down the clock to Brexit Day, March 29th.
Tonight's vote shows there is no majority for the Prime Minister's course of action in dealing with Brexit. Yet again, her government has been defeated. The government cannot keep on ignoring Parliament or ploughing on towards the 29th of March without a coherent plan. She cannot keep on just running down the clock and hoping that something will turn up that will save her day and save her face.
Of course, we'll bring you all developments as they happen on the Brexit story. For the first time ever, the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam is showing off its ensemble of its Rembrandt works to celebrate the 350th anniversary of the painter's death. The landmark exhibition features nearly 400 of the Golden Age master's paintings and aims to show how his iconic self-portraits prefigure our modern, selfie-obsessed world.
It's a once-in-a-lifetime exhibition, unlikely to be repeated again. Nearly 400 of Rembrandt's paintings, drawings and sketches are being displayed together in an extensive show of his works. It's an opportunity to see some of the Dutch artist's masterpieces, like Syndic of the Drapers Guild and The Jewish Bride. But it's also a rare chance to see some of his lesser-known works, usually kept from the public.
The light makes the drawings fade, so we almost never exhibit them. This won't happen again in this generation.
The extensive collection includes dozens of self-portraits showing Rembrandt's progression from a fresh-faced young man to an aging artist tormented by money problems. Curators say the works could be compared to 17th century selfies and show how the artist prefigured the trends of our modern world.
Rembrandt is the first artist in history. One can even say the first Instagrammer who captured his own life. No artist has ever done as many self-portraits as Rembrandt. He paints his family, he draws his friends, he goes to the street, to the countryside. He even lets us into his own bedroom.
The exhibition is part of a series of shows at museums across the Netherlands this year to mark the 350th anniversary of the artist's death. It runs from the 15th of February until the 10th of June.
Rembrandt, Instagram, maybe. But anyway, great exhibition, the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. Take it in if you possibly can. I'm trying to book a weekend there as soon as possible. Let's remind you now of the main world news headlines here, live from Paris. The US Senate has resoundingly approved a border security compromise that ignores most of President Donald Trump's demands for building a wall with Mexico. The bill should avoid another government shutdown, and Trump is then to declare a national emergency to get that near $6 billion for his border wall. The last day of campaigning in the presidential election in Nigeria, young people said to be supporters of the president tried to storm the Electoral Commission. That apparently linked to the legislative vote. Buhari and his chief rival Abu Bakr have signed an accord to accept the results of the presidential election, no matter how it goes, in order to avoid any possible trouble or violence after the result. Suicide bomb attack claims at least 44 lives in Kashmir. The victims are Indian soldiers. The attack is claimed by a Muslim terror group. The incident stokes the existing tension between India and Pakistan over who Kashmir belongs to.